Real progress on diversity and inclusion doesn't happen without real work. Ideally, when we try to create change, we can do so without error. But that's not the kind of world we live in, the ideal kind. Even if we each had a blueprint, a prototype, or a manual, we would still have setbacks. We would still make mistakes. So each day we must strive to create a culture and a community that includes all of us, to ensure that systems and societies support all of us. We must create, iterate, and create again, because that's the work. Good intentions alone don't make real progress, and progress will never be perfect. Progress requires us each to examine our decisions, our perceptions, our attitudes, and the impact we have on the world around us. When it comes to diversity and inclusion, this is about honesty and accountability. This is about each of us choosing to do the work for all of us. Because we can't just do more. We can't just do better. We must do the work. Continue your inclusion journey with us at aka.ms/inclusion journey.
Hello, everyone. I'm Lindsay-Rae McIntyre, the Chief Diversity Officer of Microsoft, and thanks so much for joining us today for this important conversation. The work of diversity and inclusion is evolving, and there is a lot of conversation around remote work and hybrid work and the situations that some employees are finding themselves in, connecting in the workplace and connecting virtually. As these things continue to shift, we wanted to explore the ways in which things like bias, microaggressions, and other non-inclusive behavior might show up in workplaces around the world, and what we as leaders can be doing differently to support our employees and our organizations to evolve and get better right now. With that, I'm pleased to invite Professor Binna Kandola to the conversation. Professor Binna Kandola is a business psychologist, senior partner, and co-founder of Pearn Kandola. Over the past 35 years, he's worked on a wide variety of projects for public and private sector clients, both in the United Kingdom and around the world. He is the author of 10 books, 3 of which are on the subject of bias: The Invention of Difference, The Story of Gender and Bias at Work; The Value of Difference, Eliminating Bias in Organizations; and Racism at Work, The Danger of Indifference. He joined us earlier this year at Include 2021, and we're pleased to have him back with us today for this conversation. Welcome, Binna.
Thank you, Lindsay-Rae. It's a great pleasure to be back, and thank you for inviting me.
As you know, we like to start with a grounding on what we're talking about. At Microsoft, we've been exploring the topic of bias for years now, along with non-inclusive behavior like microaggressions. But for those who may be new to this topic, can you share a little bit more about what we're actually talking about in the context of microaggressions, bias in the workplace?
When we talk about, take microaggressions first, these are micro behaviors, obviously, but my definition is the kinds of daily or commonplace behaviors or aspects of an environment which signal wittingly or unwittingly to members of outgroups that they are not welcome and they don't belong. So they're small behaviors that we may be displaying, but also things around us in the environment.
It might be easy to disregard these things in the context of the diversity and inclusion work. Say they're small things in the context of the systemic changes that organizations are needing to make. Can you speak to why addressing these behaviors are so important?
I think they're critically important because what the research shows us, that the small gestures actually mean something. They count. And whether they're the small gestures that show that we're included or the small gestures that show we're excluded, we notice. And the small gestures that show us that we're excluded, it's actually been shown that it has a neurological impact. There's a part of the brain that lights up when we're feeling we're being excluded. It's called the dorsal anterior cingulate cortex. And intriguingly, it's the same part of the brain that feels pain, physical pain, if we stub our toe on a table leg, that is the same part of the brain. So the emotions that we feel are analogous to physical pain. And once we experience that and we're getting signals that we don't belong to this group, we then start to withdraw. Because it goes back to the kind of the tribal evolutionary behavior of tribal behavior. It's not safe for me to be here. We then withdraw. We then don't get involved in the team. The team don't get, so it kind of becomes a vicious cycle. But I get more signals that I don't belong. That then impacts my well-being. It's understandable, but it also, as research has shown, it impacts our performance as well. So these small behaviours have an impact in terms of my feelings about the group, my well-being, my performance. And as soon as my performance is impacted, that's going to affect my annual reviews, which then affect my pay, which will then affect whether I get put onto the talent programs. And it all starts from here, from us interacting with one another. It's that critical.
And at a time when there is an enormous amount for all organizations to focus on big systems changes around diversity and inclusion, some might be asking, why are we focused on the microaggressions or on individual bias?
Yeah, it's a great question. It is a great question, actually. And I think a lot of people do think that, actually. We have policies, we've got a strategy, we've got a target, we're making some progress. It's all sorted, so it's somebody else's responsibility. Actually, it's all of our responsibilities. And it shows up in us in those small behaviors. So if you imagine in the pre-pandemic world and the post-pandemic world, you turn up to an office, you get a nod of recognition from the person at reception. You go into the lift is crowded. Somebody at the back of the lift you recognise. They raise their eyebrows, droop their shoulders, smile, just letting you know, back again. You walk into your office, your boss is there already, on a video call, gives you a wave. And as your computer's booting up, you go and get your first hit of caffeine for the day, and somebody has a conversation with you. Insignificant. Mundane, nothing that you would go home and tell anybody about in the evening or you even reflect upon. But imagine if those things were not present, that you didn't get that nod of recognition, you didn't get the wave, nobody asked you what you're up to at the weekend. Or if those things were missing, think what the workplace was like. And think if you didn't get those behaviours and you were behind the person who did. Now you know you're being excluded in very subtle ways, and it has an enormous impact. And we're programmed to be like this. Human beings are programmed to pick up on these small cues.
When you think about sort of the extra complexity, if you will, of engaging with one another through a screen, what is perhaps the same about the research that you've done for years on bias and microaggression, and what are you seeing that's changing?
Yes, some of it has changed, and it's the nature of the work itself. I mean, the way we've been working, we haven't just been remote working. We've been working in what's called a capsule environment, where we're working in the same environment and we're kind of with the same people all the time. So there's sensory deprivation as well. And what we know is, just generally speaking, from the research that's been done in other capsule environments like polar ice cap expeditions, nuclear submarines, space station missions, what we know is the longer a mission goes on, the more you get something known as psychological closing that takes place. So we start communicating with the people that we are more familiar with. So there's a closing down. So our in-group gets even smaller, and we start passing information. We start passing less risk information and less information anyway to people outside of the group. We get what's known as autonomization. So we start to get a strong sense of ourselves with our small group, which means the others become even more kind of stereotyped. And we tend to blame them for other things that go on. So there's a lack of empathy. So generally speaking, this is what goes on. And that within that, you will find that groups who are less represented and may represent diversity in our organisations, less represented at senior levels or less represented at all, there are significant issues that this pandemic has posed to them, whether it's people with disabilities, minorities, women, parents, wherever the LGBT plus, all of those face specific issues as well.
A few things came up for us at Microsoft this year that show how the diversity and inclusion conversation is evolving. Topics like mental health, working parents and caregivers, age, and the acts of hate and violence against many communities around the world. What insights do you have on how these topics are coming up around the world in your client sets or in your research?
Yeah, we are sociable animals. So actually missing that human contact has been really significant for everybody. And that will affect our mental health, actually. And it's also about the things that we kind of took for granted, like the journey to work. It's boring, it's mundane, I'd rather not do it. On the other hand, the journey from your house to the railway station, from the railway station to your workplace, buying a coffee en route, all of those things meant that we were interacting with different people and there was different sensory stimuli that we were getting. So the interactions you are having with the people in your household will be different from the ones in the railway station, the different one in the coffee shop, and different the ones that you have in your office. And we miss that. We miss that kind of variety of human engagement, and that starts to impact that starts to impact our mental health. The point about caregivers were impacted. In our research that we did, caregivers were impacted more than people who didn't have caring responsibilities. And parents in particular were their job satisfaction and their well-being was impacted more than people who didn't have those caring responsibilities. And within the category of parent, mothers were affected more than fathers. And so this point about intruding into people's households, and particularly when the schools were shut down in many parts of the world, it kind of became apparent then that the person you're talking to is a mother, and implicitly we're thinking, why aren't you looking after your children? Or are your children affecting your work? And we found in our research that of all of the groups that we looked at, women's identity and authenticity was affected the most. And we think it's this point about this intrusion into people's home life and this kind of expectation, these prescriptive stereotypes that people had. Age research done around the world, young people concerned about their careers, older people, 55 plus, they're actually concerned about, were impacted hugely actually by being put on furlough or reduced hours. That then impacted their retirement plans. So all age groups were impacted. And I think the final group you mentioned was the Anti-Asian Prejudice. And we found in research last year and this year in Britain and America that there was a huge increase in anti-Asian prejudice, both in the workplace and outside of it. Interestingly, when we had about 1,000 people in our survey, but we did a lot of interviews in both countries. And interestingly, in organisations, the people told us there was a variety of experience, but some people told us when it started going on in our organisation, the leadership in this organisation said, pack it in. This isn't acceptable. It's not in line with our values. And they told us it stopped. And it just shows you how sometimes the measures can be as simple as that, as the leader just kind of say, you know what, this isn't us. It's not our values. Don't do it. And it can have an immediate impact.
I remember as we prepared for this conversation, you provided a piece of insight that I thought was really interesting, that for folks who are used to an in-office culture environment, in some cases, it was very obvious what meetings you were in or not. And with the virtual interaction that we all have, sometimes we don't even know what we're being excluded from anymore.
Yeah. Actually, that happened. We did some research on anti-Asian prejudice in the light of coronavirus. And we had some examples of people of Asian origin, of what we would call in Britain of Chinese heritage. Actually, I'm not even sure you call it a microaggression, but it was happening without their knowledge. They were not being invited to meetings. And one person told us that they kind of thought, oh, I think I should be in that meeting. And somehow they got themselves into it. And they got into the meeting and found the other people giggling, chuckling over the fact that they'd excluded this person, not knowing they then kind of barged in. So there is that kind of thing about who gets invited. It's more formal and you don't know whether they're going on or not. It's a great point, actually, Lindsay-Rae.
Yeah, for us at Microsoft, it's been really important for us to obviously be accountable and responsible for the technology and creating a more inclusive experience and giving control to the end users and how people engage in the chat or in the room. Yeah. That, we have raise the hand features. And one of the things that we've talked a lot about is how COVID and the sort of camera on expectations of the pandemic have invited people into spaces that maybe we weren't ready to have them join us in, like our homes, and the uneven experience that we have, and the empathy with it we must build for people who don't have same or similar broadband infrastructure, for people who are living in shared spaces with roommates or extended family. Can you talk about sort of how we need to be more thoughtful about the biases, microaggressions, and non-inclusive behavior that come from the difference of circumstance that we all find ourselves in the hybrid workplace?
Yeah, I think that it's a really valuable insight, that the one you just given. Actually, I want to go back to something you said earlier in a moment, actually, about the different ways of interacting, because I think that's a really important, and that's a very positive point. But this point, actually, you wouldn't normally see where I am. Now, this is fine, actually. It's an airy room. I've got a desk. I've got to have a laptop. I've got a computer, rather. So it's respectable. But like you said, if you're in a bed sit, your laptop is literally on your lap. You're kind of sharing your living environment with people in a way that you wouldn't ordinarily do, and you're seeing other people kind of more comfortable, and you're feeling slightly inadequate because of it. And back to that point about microaggressions, we tend to concentrate on the interpersonal behaviour for obvious reasons, but my definition also had about aspects of the environment. And this aspect of the environment, if I'm feeling uncomfortable about the environment in which I am, comparing it to others, and I'm concerned about the judgments that people will be making about me, and they may not be, of course, I'm concerned about the judgment that could count as an environmental micro inequity that people are experiencing.
Are there regional and national issues that we need to consider and be thoughtful of in the context of inclusion for the new world of work? Are there things about the ways of working that may differ from culture to culture?
Yeah, I'm sure an organisation like Microsoft will know this already, but you'll already be aware of the kind of the cultural differences, whether a culture is individualistic or more community oriented. There are differences along that, whether it's hierarchical or more egalitarian. There are differences that exist, and the technology can make it. We can forget, actually, that when we have a meeting, that the environment in which people, the culture and people working is actually very different from the one I may be located in now. But the things that you would already be aware of. But in some parts of the world, actually, the living quarters of people, where they live, is actually much more constrained. Property prices are so high that actually working from home is a really uncomfortable experience, and that people would rather be in the office.
We talk a lot about the importance of psychological safety and the incredible innovation and contribution that gets unlocked when we create this aspirational space that is psychologically safe. But how do we do that? What advice would you have for leaders who aspire to that and yet don't necessarily know how to get there?
Yeah, I mean, the notion of psychological safety, as you know, is actually that the people can feel they can be themselves, they can speak up in a meeting without fear of any consequences to their career or their self-image within the group. So they just feel they can speak up and be themselves, and of course that then makes it a very central concept when we're talking about inclusion. But the leaders need to demonstrate it themselves. I mean, you did say this a moment ago, actually, where leaders have to speak up. I'm not getting different views here. And there are processes you can follow. You get people to act as devil's advocate, ask the alternative questions. What if somebody else thought this? Bring a hypothetical person into the room. What do you think they might be saying here? But when it comes to inclusion, and where leaders are getting feedback from their teams. So we have a tool where you can get feedback from your teams about how inclusive you are, and you can get insight into your own behaviours. But where a leader gets feedback and then acts on the feedback, that's clearly helping the leader. It's helping them create a more inclusive team. It also has been found to create more psychological safety, because people then think, oh, I can actually give feedback to my boss, And if they like it, they'll act upon it. So I may give them more feedback in the future.
How do we think about the muscles that we must build or the conversations we must have to be successful around diversity and inclusion in hybrid in the context of a global company conversation?
Yeah, I think we just need to recognize that hybrid working, that some people will prefer to work from home, other people come into the office or the workplace, they'll come into the workplace more often. There will be a tendency, there always has been a tendency actually to have a bias towards those people who are physically close to us, the ones who are in the workplace with us. And that we've all been, or many of us actually have been working from our homes, not everybody, but many of us have been working from our homes. We kind of got used to it. And then we just need to be aware that the people who are closer to us in the workplace are the ones who tend to become our in-group. And we mustn't forget the people who are working from home because they're part of our team. They are part of our business. They are part of the productive life of this organisation. And if we ignore them, we are reducing the effectiveness of our organisation overall.
Yeah, at Microsoft, we for sure have seen productivity either stay the same or in fact increase. And yet we too see the challenges of creating boundaries between work and life and the need for us to be able to have really intentional, explicit conversations with our peers and with our managers on when we're working, where we're working, how we're working, so that that's all sort of said out loud and everybody feels like they're informed and connected. And with that, the opportunity to create boundaries and be more flexible over the course of a work day for sure is creating relief. And as Microsoft, I know that, we've really challenged ourselves over the course of hybrid to think about how we can be creative and innovative in how we support our employees in new and different ways. And I know that lots of other companies have done that too, in the context of, an incredibly competitive environment. It's on all of us as employers and as leaders to think hard about how we can be more empathetic, how we can be more supportive of our employees, and how we can create the conditions for folks to thrive in a hybrid environment, in a workplace environment, and everything in between.
There was so much richness in what you just said. I just have to comment on some of it. I mean, I just go back to your first comment, actually, about showing creativity about how we work here, about leaders showing creativity. And this notion, and this has come out from the research as well, actually, that particularly people who are furloughed, there's less trust in their line managers. But this notion that we're going to have to create a new future together is, and it's the point that you just made, it's just I just think it's such an important point. That if we're going to make this work, we're going to have to do it, but by leaders and colleagues together, kind of working actually what's going to make this work. And the other point I just want to underline, actually, from what you said, Lindsay-Rae, was the point about empathy. It's just such an incredible ability that human beings have that we can put ourselves into the shoes of somebody else. And we tend to have a circle of people. We kind of have a circle of empathy, and the people who are closest to us, we are most empathetic towards. But there's no reason why we can't extend that circle, and that's effectively what you're saying, actually. That we need to have that ability to empathise and just kind of think, I'm going to empathise with a few more people than I did before. I was just reflecting what you just said. I just want to underscore it.
So many leaders are wondering, Lindsay-Rae and Binna, this is a great conversation, but what can I do? And so I'd love you to share with our audience maybe one or two things that you think they can do.
Yeah, I mean, you've touched on it already, actually, that about what you're doing at Microsoft is you have conversations about it, you talk about it. And I think one of the things I have picked up on, for some of the topics about diversity and inclusion, I've come across leaders come and say, I'm really concerned, I'm very bothered about diversity, I know we can be better on inclusion. I know as a leader I need to talk about this. And I also know that I'm very anxious about talking about this for fear of saying the wrong words, using the wrong expression, causing offence when I didn't mean to. And so what do I do about that? And so they have this real concern about diversity and inclusion and the anxiety about talking about it, so they end up doing nothing. And I think, like you're saying, actually talk about it. but actually be authentic in talking about it. So you say, I am really concerned. Diversity and inclusion is really important to me. It's a value that I hold. I think great. It's a value of part of the corporation as well. But I also feel anxious in discussing this. So should I say, I am going to talk about it, but should I cause any offence? Please remember that that's not my intention. So put me straight, give me the feedback, but I don't mean to cause offence. So just assume good intent on my part. So I think we need to just be authentic in terms of the whole set of experiences, the whole set of feelings that we have about this, but then talk about it, and then talk about your own experiences, what it means to you. And I think it is a big change, actually, that I've noticed compared to the start of my career, which was decades ago. The leaders today are genuinely interested, involved, motivated. They want to do something about diversity, and I think they could be talking more from the heart now, rather than having something scripted for them that they don't really understand.
Yeah, I love that. And one of the things that we've done at Microsoft through our allyship work and sort of having the conversation is giving leaders and peers and colleagues the language and the structure to be able to signpost exactly that. I'm going to try this on for size team, or I'd like to pause the conversation to highlight something that I'm acknowledging right now, or I see going on right now. And, I'm working on my allyship skill sets. And so here I go. Right. And that sometimes when you sort of say it out loud and signpost your intentionality and what you're working on, not only will you have the space to do it, but you will also get really thoughtful feedback that you can take and accommodate and learn and grow from, because goodness knows we're all going to have to fail in this space to continue to get better.
Oh, that's so true. I mean, I think it's a constant frustration that I have, actually, that I just trip up. So I trip up so often, and I think I trip up less often now than I used to. But that's the whole point, isn't it? You trip up, you learn, you dust yourself off, you carry on. It's kind of there's nobody perfect, basically, is there? That we're all learning.
I want to thank Professor Binacondola for joining us and sharing his perspectives. We have Professor Binacondola from Include 2021 and so many other experts and academics on our Inclusion Journey website, which I hope you'll join us on. It can be found at aka.ms/inclusion journey. And we'll continue adding to the conversation. We hope you'll join us as we grow and learn together.